Hi everyone, Merry Christmas Eve. I hope you don't mind the wind blowing in the background. Nothing I can really do about that right now. But since it is Christmas, I wanted to bring you a review of what I think is the greatest Christmas film of all time, and then some. And of course, I'm talking about It's a Wonderful Life, directed by Frank Capra, starring the legendary James Stewart, Donna Reed, Lionel Barrymore, Thomas Mitchell, Henry Travers, and so many more actors of that era. This really is not only, I've already said it's the best Christmas film, but I think that this is the greatest film ever made. Hands down. And so when people say, oh, well, what's your favorite movie? And it's like, oh, It's a Wonderful Life. And you're like, well, maybe for Christmas. Someone said that to me one time. I'm like, why does that matter? I mean, if it's a great film, it's a great film, right? And I think that this is one of those films where I only watch it at the holiday season, but it really transcends Christmas itself and just cinematic storytelling in general. I mean, obviously Frank Capra was known for his sentimentality in his films, and I think a lot of times when people use that term sentimentality, they often pass it off as sappy or cheesy, and I don't think that is the case at all with Capra, especially with this film, because yes, it is sentimental, but this film goes in very, very dark and complicated places that no film from its era would even dare to even attempt to try to go to. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love this film so much. And granted, the filmmaking isn't necessarily super flashy or anything like that, but what Capra does with the storytelling and what he will do with certain shots in the film, I think that this film has some of the best close-ups I've ever seen, where James Stewart will just walk into the camera and it will just hold on his face and get these amazing reactions out of him and what George Bailey is feeling in the moment. I think it's absolutely incredible. But really, I just think how this film, its story and how it became a classic is just so incredible, because it came out in 1946 and got mixed reviews. I don't know how the hell this movie got mixed reviews. Like, come on. It should have been obvious from the get how good this was. But what happened was it got nominated for some Oscars. James Stewart got nominated. It won a special Oscar for its effects of the snowflakes, because nothing that realistic had ever been done before with effects on a studio lot. And so basically that was a pretty huge deal, coming up with the snow. But really, I guess it kind of fell on flat ears and people forgot about it as time went on. And Capra even said himself that it was his favorite film that he made. And I think when a filmmaker says that, they might know what they're talking about, because they spent all their time and effort putting into their films. And I think it obviously had a critical reevaluation when it was pulled out for, I guess, television airings at Christmas time on, channels like TCM or whatever, and everyone's like, whoa, what is this movie like? How have we not seen this? And because it lapsed into the public domain, no one knew the copyright. And then after those reruns, its popularity kept growing and growing and growing until the point that it is now considered an all-time cinematic classic. It's hard to find a list, except maybe Sight and Sounds, that doesn't have this listed in the top 100 films, because it really is such a seminal piece of storytelling. I think, without question, one of the greatest screenplays ever written. And I think that is evident from how the story starts off, of course, because I will get into spoilers of this movie, because, I mean, if you guys haven't seen it at this point, I mean, come on, it came out well over 70 years ago, so. But just how it starts out with all these people through VO, you hear them praying for George Bailey, and I love that line where it's like, there's a man on earth who needs our help. It's like, what, is he sick? No, worse, he's discouraged. Because really, I think that kind of shows you, or at least gives you an inkling into who George Bailey is as a person, and obviously how much people care about him. And then, of course, I think the opening exposition is so interesting, how they have Joseph and whoever else is in charge. I don't know if it was God or someone else, and how they bring Clarence, and he's just like a little dot on the screen, and it lights up whenever they talk. to each other. I think that's so brilliant. And yet again, just the way they start off the story, how they set up these events that occurred in George Bailey's life, all the supporting characters surrounding him, it really is not a single moment is wasted in this movie. I think I can say that with 100% certainty. Especially that opening scene after Harry falls into the water and he saves him at Mr. Gower's drugstore. You get introduced to the characters of Violet Bick and Mary Hatch when they're young, and who George Bailey is, this adventurous, ambitious kid. And of course, just on his way to the job, you see Mr. Potter pass by the Bailey building alone, which I think basically sets off the story so perfectly. And as I said, when it gets into dark material here, I mean, the first time I saw this, when Mr. Gower put the poison into the capsule, I was like, oh my goodness, when he's slapping his ear because he's not delivering and his blood starts coming out, I was like, geez! I did not expect this film from 1946 to be so dark. But it really just sets off the tone that is going to be this film. Not only is there an edge to it, a profoundness that you don't really get in films of this era, but it also has such a natural sense of humor throughout this entire thing. I mean, this film is damn funny. I mean, there is no denying that. Whether it be the scene at the dance hall, the high school dance when they all fall into the pool. I mean, just so great. And of course, just the dialogue between these characters, whether it be George or Harry or him and Mary. I mean, so much great. Or Bert and Ernie. I mean, you gotta love their interplay throughout the movie. But I tell you, really, it's those scenes of beautiful human connection that really draw me into the story, whether it be the regret on Mr. Gower's face when he realized what he's done, or to me, one of the greatest and the most subtle moments of all film is at the dance when George gets reintroduced to Mary Hatch once again, played by the ever so beautiful and radiant Donna Reed, and just this glance across the gym auditorium, no words have to be spoken, just these two people looking at each other. I mean, I tell you, the chemistry between James Stewart and Donna Reed is hands down maybe the best chemistry I've ever seen in any movie. Only comparison I can think of is Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy in the Before trilogy, and Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca. There really isn't anything quite like this romance. And while you could say, yeah, Casablanca is the greatest romance of all time, if we're talking purely on a film standard, I think that this is the greatest romance just applied to any story. The story of George and Mary Bailey. I think this is absolutely brilliant. Like, that telephone scene when they're on the phone with Sam Wainwright and you just see them, their faces so closely pushed together and their eyes darting back and forth, looking down, looking at each other, going all over the room, I think is imbued with such a rich subtext underneath what Sam is saying, especially that line. It's like, it's a chance of a lifetime. And you realize in the moment that it's not what Sam's talking about. It's them being together. And that, I think, has maybe the most sexual tension I've ever seen in any movie. And it isn't anything gratuitous or inherently sexual in regards to them, touching each other, anything like that. It's just these people who are so drawn to one another, just that moment of contemplation, the nervousness, everything about it is absolutely incredible, except when he shakes her. I could do without that, but that's not enough to bring the film down for me. And I just absolutely adore their relationship in the film, but more on that later. Because what this film really succeeds at is making George Bailey maybe the most relatable everyman of all time. Played so brilliantly by James Stewart, in which I think is his best performance. I think is one of the greatest performances of all time. He really runs the whole gamut of human emotions in this, whether it be his charisma, his sense of humor, his generosity, his selfishness, if any at all. I mean, that's the thing that makes George Bailey so relatable. He's a flawed individual, but he's a great person. And I think you see the actions that he takes throughout this movie, which for almost the entire thing are so selfless, because I think another reason why you can relate to George Bailey so much is because a lot of people see themselves in him. He's this man who's so ambitious. He wants to explore the world. He wants to dust this little crummy town off his feet. And really, he gets trapped at every step of the way and feels so helpless that he can't do anything about it. And I think so many people feel that in their lives, or they're just trapped in the same monotony, or they had these big dreams but they settled, or what have you. I mean, George Bailey really is every single person who never got that chance to be greater than they thought they could be. But the thing that I love about this film is it shows that doesn't matter, because regardless of whether he achieved his personal dreams or not, you see him helping his community every step of the way. I mean, especially the scene of the run on the bank, I think is one of the best examples of this. They literally give away their honeymoon money just to save these people, to not have to crawl under Potter's feet, who is played so brilliantly by Lionel Barrymore, one of the most despicable villains in all of film. And he could have been super two-dimensional, because let's be honest, he is a piece of garbage in this film. No shred of humanity whatsoever, but you get that wonderful scene between him and George Bailey where he's basically manipulating him into joining his workforce and getting hired by him, trying to give him the dream he's always wanted. But then that moment when he realizes after he shakes his hand that that's not it, it really adds so much to the character of Mr. Potter, regardless of how evil he is. I mean, what a wonderful villain you love to root against. And, oh my goodness, I think he's the perfect foil to George Bailey, because essentially he's what George Bailey could have been if he had been consumed by greed, if he hadn't had a good head on his shoulders and actually cared about the people around him. I mean, because you can tell how much these people love George every time he walks into the room. He's the center of attention without even trying. And I just love these moments, as I was referring to earlier, with these close-ups where Capra just chooses for James Stewart to walk in a frame, especially that shot when they tell him that they keep the building alone open, but that he has to stay on or they'll side with Potter if he doesn't, and he just walks in his frame. The beautiful shot composition on his face, and that conflict indicated by the lighting is just so brilliant. Or when his brother Harry comes back with his wife, played by Virginia Patton, rest in peace, because I know she just passed away this year, and you see that track on James Stewart's face, and you see the contemplation and really the conflict playing out in George Bailey's mind. It is just so brilliant from an acting perspective and a directorial perspective, just entering the inner mind of this character. But I think, once again, just the payoff to this movie. This film is the definition of payoff. Even at the midpoint of the film, which I think is maybe the most brilliant midpoint of any film. Well, I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? But that honeymoon scene, that to me is maybe the greatest romance scene in the history of cinema. I mean, just him walking into that house that they threw rocks into, and of course Bert and Ernie singing outside the window, and then of course Mary just saying to him, "Remember the night we threw rocks in this house? This is what I wished for." I mean, in lesser hands that line could come off as so corny or so passé, but it is so earned. And every time I am just moved to tears by that scene. I mean, it is absolutely incredible, and I just can't think of any scene more lovely in the history of the cinematic medium. I really can't. And with all this in mind, just seeing what happens to George at the end of this movie when his Uncle Billy, played by the brilliant character actor Thomas Mitchell, loses the money and into the hands of Potter, no less. Just you finally see him reach that breaking point that he's been gearing towards this whole movie. The whole system is stacked against him, and so is this narrative. And I think that's what makes the conflict in this movie so brilliant and so relatable. And you just see him taking it out on his family, and whether it be Mr. Welsh and Mrs. Welsh, and you really see this man's breaking point, and I think leads to some of the most brilliant acting in this movie. I mean, especially that scene where he grabs his son Tommy, and you just see tears streaming down his face. Also, a lot of people think that James Stewart didn't have that capability before he went to the war and became a general. And I think the war really had a profound emotional impact on him, which obviously it did on most soldiers coming back with PTSD. But I think that scene really shows the emotional depths that he took this character to. I mean, throughout this entire thing. But man, when you get to that climax of the third act of this film, when Clarence finally shows up in the flesh, played by the brilliant Henry Travers, who I think should have been nominated for this film, as should have been Donna Reed and Lionel Barrymore. Really adds such a levity to this film, but a profoundness too, that even enhances the tragedy of George's situation, showing him what Bedford Falls would have been without his help, and just seeing all the interactions. I love how it opens up this really cataclysmic butterfly effect as you see everything that he was there to save everybody from or help them with absolutely tears this entire town apart. I mean, Potter's taken over. Mr. Gower went to prison for 20 years for killing the kid. Harry drowned when he was 9 and wasn't there to save all the men on the transport that he saved during World War II. Really, it's just this microcosm that just opens up and makes you realize how much of a big effect this seemingly worthless man had on his entire community, and really proves to him that he had a wonderful life. And I think once he learns to truly appreciate it, it makes the ending that much sweeter. My goodness, I think anyone can agree with me. And maybe not your number one, I don't know, but I think it is the greatest ending to any film ever. Just talk about paying it forward and paying off everything. This is what I am talking about. The definition of payoff, once again, when he finally appreciates his life for what it is. You see that complete shift, this complete unbridled and utter joy coming from James Stewart's performance as George Bailey. But when everybody comes in and starts bringing the money, oh my goodness, really you see how his efforts to help this community paid off. And I think this film has such a wonderful message about individuality and also purpose in one's own community, and how even though you may not be where you think you are, it doesn't mean that your life is any less important or meaningful. And I mean that line when Harry comes early and he says, "To my big brother George, the richest man in town." I mean, I'm just getting emotional talking about it. Because to me, that really is such a powerful statement. Because, yeah, obviously he's not physically or literally the richest man in town. But as Clarence says to him in writing at the end of the film, remember, no man is a failure if he has friends. I mean, what greater lesson could you ever learn from any film? And of course, that beautiful ending where they're all singing Auld Lang Syne, and you hear Zuzu say, "Teacher said every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings." And you know, he just gives that wink up at Clarence in heaven. It really is just such a beautiful ending to literally one of the darkest, one of the most life-affirming, one of the most heartwarming, one of the most challenging movies you will ever see in your entire life. And that is why I think It's a Wonderful Life is the greatest film ever made. Every time I go back to it, it never fails to make me cry. It even makes me cry just talking about it, because it really is that impactful of a film. And of course, it goes without saying what my score is going to be for this movie. This is a 10 out of 10. An absolute masterpiece of the highest order. Yeah, there may be a couple things that socially don't age as well today, but those moments are so few and far between, and I think the good-hearted nature of these characters really shows you that maybe that wasn't even that crazy in the first place. I don't think there was any ill intent there. I really think that this is just a stunning, stunning movie from top to bottom, and I think most people who watch it will agree. You're heartless if you're not moved by this film. Quite honestly, I'm sorry. This really is sentimentality at its finest and its most profound. So, yeah, guys, obviously, if you watch this review, you've probably seen It's a Wonderful Life. But I would still love to hear your personal stories with Wonderful Life, how you came upon it the first time you saw it, or just how much you loved the film. Really, one of the absolute best cinema has to offer, not just Christmas. I think that argument is absolutely ludicrous. But yeah, guys, if you like what you're seeing here, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. I hope to bring you more classic reviews like this, and obviously contemporary reviews as well, as we're going to be getting into quite a few next week. But really, until then, guys, you have yourself a very Merry Christmas, and I'll see you soon.